So yesterday I was going to read as much Sartre as possible, and then a few things happened and suddenly I made a video instead. That video is currently waiting for me to finish editing it. It will go up before this one, and if you haven't watched it already, please do. It's probably titled Implications, in an effort to stop people accusing me of accusing them of being homophobes. Prompts for making this video, the main one was a video which is going around Tumblr at the moment, and it's called Love Is All You Need, and it's a video which explores what heterophobia would be like if it existed, which it doesn't, and it's making a point about how terrible homophobia is and can be. And in that film there is violence and people, you know, properly screaming at each other and slurs all over the place, and I started thinking, oh, I'm so lucky that I live in a culture where I don't have to face homophobia. Except I do. So let's talk about the scenario at the beginning of my video, which is a true story. The whole thing is a true story. Everything in that video has been actually said either to or about me. So that story came from TAP class, which is probably why you won't have heard of it, Sean. For all those watching, Sean and I attended the same dance school, but Sean didn't do TAP, and that was the only class I did by the end. So it happened as I told it. We were just doing an exercise or something, music finished, and these lads outside yelling, "James is a faggot." And there was just a moment of silence, and then suddenly one girl started to hug James, and then another, until we were all hugging him. And I can't remember who said, "We know it's not true." It was probably more than one person. Our teacher pointed out, "Oh well, you may be calling James gay, but he's the one surrounded by girls." And I think the only person who wasn't at least a tiny bit homophobic, even indirectly, in that situation, was probably James, who, as I remember it, and this was years ago, I don't think he said a word throughout. I don't think any of the people within that room were homophobes. But I think we live in a homophobic culture, because we were reassuring James by saying, "We know it's not true," and people were pointing out that he had all these girls, like, yeah, look at his heterosexuality. You see what I'm getting at? One of the other quotes in that video is, "Do you want me to tell him?" And that's not part of a homophobic culture, is it? Except it kind of sort of is, because it makes sexuality into a big deal, because really sexuality, you know, shouldn't be important, except it is. And here's another thing that shouldn't be important but is, and that's labels. There's a bit towards the end of the video where I'm it's just my inner monologue saying I like girls but I like boys, but what the hell am I? And that lasted for about 3 years. In an ideal world, labels wouldn't be important at all. But when you only have access to a few, then suddenly they're the most important thing in the world. Because I had the word gay in my lexicon, I had the word lesbian, I had the word straight. I did not have the word bisexual, I did not have the word pansexual, I didn't have the word asexual or aromantic. I had none of these words, but the two which would have helped most were bisexual and pansexual. If there had been no labels, then none of this situation would have happened, but because I only had a couple, it was just 3 years of going, who the hell am I? There are 2 clips that I am dodgy about putting into that video, and one has stayed in and the other one came out. Actually, in fact, I never actually put it in. I filmed it but didn't put it in. So the one that stayed in was the scene where I was at my interview and I mentioned the LGBTQ society, which was actually the LGBT society at that point, it hadn't changed name, and my interviewer looked up. Nothing was said there. That happened, and that's the reason I left it in, is because it happened. My interviewer, I am now quite close to them, I really like them, and I'm reverting to genderless because I don't want to identify this person, although if you know my college, then it's very easy to guess. And I don't want to imply in any way that they are homophobic. But the fact remains that that's the most attention was paid to me in that interview, was that moment. There were 3 people in the room besides me, and that was the first moment that everyone looked at me. I don't even know what their reaction actually was, but they looked at me and they stared at me. And whether they were just thinking, blimey, she's brave to admit that, or whether they were thinking, our entry rates are not very representative and not very full of minorities. So state comp, female and queer. It worries me to this day that they could have been thinking that. So to sum up, the reason why the video will probably be called Implications is that it's less about what was actually said and more about the culture that it implies. And when I say at the end, I'm making a point, but unfortunately so were you, the thing is that the people who said those lines were probably not trying to make a point. But that's the point. Every time someone uses the word frape, they're not trying to make a point, except they're making one. And every time you say, oh, that's so gay, you're not trying to make a point, but you're making a point. So no, I have never been beaten up for being bisexual, and no one has ever said to me, you are a freak. But people have said to me, bisexuals are freaks. Admittedly, that was before I came out. And people have said to me, you don't make sense. And people have said to me, you shouldn't exist. Except they haven't said that, they've implied it. And it's really hard to fight against an implication.